Okay, so let's try some of these linear equations here. And let's begin with the one that says negative 17 equals 6p minus 3. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to get this letter to be by itself. So in order for this to be alone, we have to get rid of this number and also this number. But first we get rid of this number here. And then after that, we get rid of the number that is closest or attached to the letter. So to get rid of a negative 5, what we do is we're going to add 5 to both sides of the equation. And we're going to do it to both sides of the equation so that we can be fair. Because whatever you do to one side, you must do to the other. And the reason that I chose positive 5 is because here on this side, these 5s will eliminate. And up here on this side, if I have 17 negatives adding with 5 positives, there will be more negatives remaining, and it would be 12 but negative. Because you combine the numbers, right? You go negative 17 and 5. If you have 17 negatives and 5 positives, think of it like this. That's literally 17 negatives. And then think of 5 positives. Right? So here I have 17 negatives, which is right there. And then 5 positives are there. And then notice that if I switch colors here, that what happens is these ones here, they knock out, these knock out, these knock out, and that one, and then this one and that one. So these pairs, the positive, negative, they sort of knock out. So all of these sort of knock each other out. And what are we left with if you count all the negatives that survived? There should be 12 of them, which is why I got 12 negatives here on this side. So let me switch back to my color blue. And let me drop the equal sign. And I'll keep 6p. So we're almost done. Now we just have to get p alone. So you have to ask yourself, what is happening between the 6 and the p? You see, these two are being multiplied. And the opposite of multiplication is division, which is why I use this little symbol, because that's division. And again, I chose division because division is the opposite of multiplication. And I can clearly see that the 6 and the p are being multiplied because they're sort of written side by side. When they're sort of glued together, that's multiplication. And so the opposite of multiplication, or the inverse of multiplication, is division. And these 6s, they reduce each other away. And on this side here, negative 12 divided by 6, that's negative 2. And so that's why p equals negative 2. If you want to switch the order, that's fine. So p would equal negative 2. And let me get my eraser. Let me take away these pieces here, because that's just solving. But sometimes the teachers, they want you to actually check your work. So what I'm going to do on this side, if I want to check my work, what I can do here is I can write the original problem again, but instead of p, I'm going to fill in the number that I think represents p. So watch, let me go negative 17 equals, and then I'm going to keep, let me move this little box. I'm going to keep 6, but instead of p, right, you know how it's supposed to say p right there, but instead in parentheses, I'm going to fill in that what I think p is. You see, I think that p is negative 2. And let's see what happens. So what happens between 6 times negative 2, that's negative 12. And then just drop the negative 5. And if you add those numbers, you add them, but you keep it negative. And so notice that we get a statement that is true. So this number can fall down. And notice that, hey, negative 17 equals negative 17. That is a true statement. And so that's how you check your answer. Just put a little check mark. So let's try one more of these. How about I wipe my screen clear? Let's get rid of all that. And let me take a look here. How about let's try this one here. So there's one that says negative 2/3 m minus 4 equals 10. So here the goal is to get the letter by itself. I want to get this letter m alone. So I am going to get rid of the fraction, and I am going to get rid of this number. I'm going to move this number to this side, and then we'll get rid of the fraction by moving it to the other side, because then m will be by itself. So how do I get rid of a negative 4? Well, this is going subtraction 4. So what's the opposite of subtraction? the opposite of subtraction is addition 4. So I'm going to use addition 4 to both sides. Because here on the left, those knock out, right? A negative 4 and a positive 4, they undo each other. They knock each other out. And so here this falls, negative 2/3 m equals, and then 10 plus 4 gives us 14. Now we're almost done. The last thing here is to get m alone, and the way to get m alone is by getting rid of this fraction. I have a negative fraction that must be dealt with. So here's what some teachers recommend. What we're going to do is we're going to multiply both sides. And what I'm going to multiply by is the fraction, but the reciprocal version, like the upside down version of this fraction. So the reciprocal version of that fraction would be a negative 3/2. Negative 3/2. And the reason that I choose that number, that fraction, negative 3/2, is because over here, watch, the 2's, they knock out. The 3's, they knock out. Even the negatives knock out. The only thing left on this side is m equals. Now the question is, what is this number here on the right-hand side? What does that equal, right? How much is that? If you're allowed to use a calculator, you can just type it in, but let's pretend that you cannot use a calculator. With no calculators, here's what you would do. I would tell my students to put a 1 underneath the 14. Now this is multiplication, and it's a fraction multiplied with a fraction. And if you have fraction times fraction, just multiply the top numbers and then just multiply the bottom numbers. So here in the top, I have negative 3 times 14. So 14 times negative 3 is negative 42. And in the bottom, I have 1 times 2, which is 2. And now, how much is 42 divided by 2? Well, 42 divided by 2, let's see, I go 2. And then 2 times 2 times 2 is 4. It's 4. And then you drop this one. And then 2 goes into itself 1 time. So I get back 21. But of course, it's not just 21. It should be negative 21, because negative 42/2 is going to be negative 20. And this would be our final answer, negative 21. So you are encouraged to check your answer. And to check your answer, what you would do is you go to the original equation. But instead of m, you would plug in negative 21. And you would show that everything here in the orange bubble, that this would equal the number that's on the other side. You would show that it equals 10. So that's how you do these problems. Use inverse operations. So instead of subtraction, I did addition. If I want to get rid of a fraction, I multiply by the reciprocal. So follow those steps carefully for these equations. And then as they want, you should always check your answers.